Audio Jungle.
Between Ukraine and Russia.
Behind this?
No, it wouldn't. And if, in fact, if we look at the likelihood of a plane crashing in Russia at the moment, Russian aviation doesn't have a particularly proud history, but in recent years it has been safe flying. And if there are concerns about any sort of aviation in Russia today, it's commercial aviation by passenger jets, and private aircraft have been mostly fine. They get their spare parts and so forth. So for this particular aircraft to crash, it doesn't look like an accident.
The crash comes 2 months after 2 months after the failed mutiny. There was an attempted coup on Moscow by Prigozhin. The Wagner Group was disbanded to a point. Many were sent to Belarus. Prigozhin was meant to be in Belarus, but we know he's been hopping around all over the place. What does this say about Vladimir Putin, who, if he is behind this, or if there are connections to the Kremlin at all, and that is a big if. Nothing, of course, is proven. That is what is being speculated this evening. But we can't detach one from the other. I think that's fair to say. At the moment, we can't detach the thread completely. What does this tell us about Vladimir Putin?
It tells us that he has made a very difficult calculation and decided in favor of getting rid of Prigozhin, if we put it that way, because there are a lot of downsides to doing so. Prigozhin obviously has his mercenaries who are very loyal to him, and in fact are loyal to him, not to the state, even the ones who now are on the payroll of the Russian state. They don't feel any particular loyalty to the Russian armed forces, which is where some of them are now. They feel loyalty to him. If they feel loyalty towards anybody at all, they won't be pleased about this. And on top of that, we need to look at the African countries where the Wagner Group, through Prigozhin, has been Russia's extended arm, and has done really, from a Russian perspective, incredible work setting up arrangements with various African regimes. What will those regimes say now that the man who is really their main contact seems to be no more?
What about the other members of the Wagner Group? There was a bit of speculation earlier, and I haven't been able to get to the bottom of it yet, that another senior commander or member of the Wagner Group was also on the passenger list for this flight that has crashed north of Moscow. What are your concerns? What do we know of the other senior members of the Wagner Group, and how they might respond to this?
Well, we know that the second gentleman, who is a very violent man, is reported to have been on the same aircraft, and of course there is a lot of speculation going on at the moment, and this is also a reflection of where Russia is today. That we don't even assume that we can trust what the information that the Russian government agencies put out. That's how far Russia has sunk in terms of credibility. But that's where we are. So we don't really know anything for certain about the other passengers. But what we do know is that Prigozhin had all on his own, through with the help of Russian government money, obviously, but on his own steam otherwise, set up this incredibly powerful small group, and that really compares to the Russian armed forces, where there are constant problems of loyalty to the state and to the employer. He clearly didn't have such problems. You can say, well, the Wagner Group are a bunch of criminals, and it's not a particularly attractive company or organization. No, it's not, but there is clearly a sort of a mafia-like loyalty within it, which is why it's so dangerous to remove Prigozhin, because then you get, if not everybody, then at least a substantial number of people against you. But again, I would look at the countries abroad where the Wagner Group is active as well. They won't be pleased. They particularly won't like being drawn into a domestic Russian power battle.
We've got a text here, and I will just run it by you because it is a question from a listener, and it is as valid as any that I ask, really. I'm just wondering, says our texter, if the Wagner Group will now defect to the Ukrainian side as far as the European operations go. Every man has his price, plus many of them must now be fearful for their futures. Elizabeth?
Yes, that is a valid question, and I wish we knew how the thinking is within the Wagner Group at the moment, and that there will be different strains of thought, different theories, different ideas within this rather large organization. The question, though, is whether even if some of the Wagnerites were to defect to Ukraine, whether the Ukrainians would want them, because actually they are not particularly palatable individuals, and what would the Ukrainians do with them other than putting them up in a house and feeding them and so forth? They wouldn't want them in their armed forces, because these are really brutal men, and also it wouldn't be wise to assume that they would be loyal to the Ukrainian government.
Jason in Liverpool says Prigozhin was a mercenary. He uses another word there, responsible for thousands of innocent deaths. Jason isn't concerned if Prigozhin is dead or not. And I suppose, that is a bit of context that we should also reflect as well, Elizabeth. Here is a very dangerous man who has tried to destabilize Vladimir Putin and is now being presumed dead. Certainly we know that his name, according to Russian authorities, was on a passenger list of an aircraft that's crashed north of Moscow. When we bring this back to the wider context, how significant is it really, if we're to enter into the diplomatic angle or the point of view that there is still an incredibly serious war going on at the moment? What is the context here? Is there any context, or is it just a very dangerous man who may have met his end, possibly because he crossed Vladimir Putin?
Kate, I think this is just the latest reminder of how authoritarian regimes operate. They come to power often through violence, but once in power, they use violence, and there is really no fully palatable side of any authoritarian regime. And if we look back, for example, to the Nazis in Germany, they came to power. Then after a while, there was a power struggle between one side of the Nazi movement and the SA. I think your listeners will remember that. And there was the Night of the Long Knives, where Hitler essentially had his rivals assassinated, and on it went. So this is the decay of authoritarian regimes, where they just descend into violence among rival groups within the movement or within the regime, and it doesn't get any better. Which is why, in a sense, we shouldn't salute anybody's death, but in a sense, this is a sign of where the Russian government is today. Yeah. That we have this rivalry and people being killed off, and it won't be the last time that happens.
Do we know where Vladimir Putin is right now, Elizabeth?
No, and I think if anybody says they do know where he is, I think we shouldn't trust them, because so little. We have reached the point where we can't trust anything the Russian government says, and those of us outside the Russian government, meaning almost all of us, have very little have no way of knowing what is happening and what is true. So it's a complete informational chaos, and I think it's at the point where even if Vladimir Putin were to turn up tonight in a
well, we've got
public
pictures of him
Russia,
here attending a concert, apparently at a concert. You are right to urge caution, but media broadcasters here have Vladimir Putin at a concert, so making a very public appearance, I suppose, which is interesting.
Yes, yeah. But my point was going to be that even if he does make a public appearance, the trust or the lack of trust in the Russian government is now at the level where many people will say, well, that's a fake, that's a double. And we have seen that happen so many times when Vladimir Putin turns up, people will say, well, that's a double, that's not him. And so it really is dangerous that the Russian government, which used to be a pretty respected member of the international community, is now at essentially the level of a mafia organization where people are killed off, where there is a rivalry that will end with somebody's death, and where you assume that you can't trust a word.
Si no puedes aportar económicamente al canal, suscríbete, comenta y comparte. Esto ayudará mucho a seguir informando.